I want to make a video of some of the notes for making my daughter's Halloween costume this year. Maybe you're not like me and everything goes right for you every time, but I always have a little bit of trouble. So the costume that I'm making is the McCalls 4887, and I'll have a couple notes about what I did right and what I did wrong on this one. I'll do the best I can to make this as concise as possible. One thing to always remember with these with the costumes is to go through the measurements, decide what size you need to get. These are the measurements that I had. I kind of circled what I needed. But what I didn't realize and neglected to do was I bought the 2, 3, 4, 5 size costume by accident I bought this pattern set without realizing that it was 4 sizes 2, 3, 4, 5, and I needed a size 7 or possibly even a size 8. But so I bought the wrong size. I made some cuts on the pattern before realizing that I had the wrong one, and then I had to go buy a new one. So I'll donate that one someplace. But get the right size. So that's one of the first tips. Then on the costume itself, I'm almost done now. But I've got the vest here, and I've got the dress underneath, and I've got my inner lining, and then over here I've got the skirt. So there's only a couple notes on this one. First of all, the pattern told me to get this trim, and I'm not sure what I did wrong or what went wrong with this, but I wound up not having enough of the trim. The trim is supposed to go from, I pinned it at the back up here. This isn't sewn on yet, obviously, but I pinned it at the back. It runs around all the way around the back of the vest and back up, and it should meet, but I don't have enough of it. So, take some careful account of how much of that you buy, because I got the wrong amount. I'm gonna have to go back and buy a whole nother length of it, because I don't think I can really patch this up very easily. Maybe I'll be able to sew this down at the bottom and just buy 2 feet of that. That'd be a little bit better than throwing a bunch of it away. But that was the one thing I got wrong. Next, the hardest part of sewing this one together for me, this costume, was, I'm going to say, this seam on the bodice between the top section and the bottom section. And it wound up actually puckering a little bit on me too. So the pattern has you basically sew the top together and sew the front and the back. And there's some of these seams, they never really tell you how to do a seam either. And maybe if you sew a lot, you're good at this and you just know. But this flat seam, this flat stitch that's done to kind of finish the edge, I didn't do that on some of the past Halloween costumes, and I did it this year, and it makes the whole costume a lot neater and look a lot more finished and to just look prettier. So I'm glad I did that, but it never really tells you how to finish the seams, and there's a lot of different ways to finish the seams as well. There's kind of a French seam, there's I forget what it's called, a Hong Kong seam, I think, and I've watched some videos on how to finish those. So I've started to do that this year, and it's made the dress have a much better finished look. I did a better seam down on the edge of this, of the dress. But this top section and the bottom section, you sew the two of them separately, and then you sew the lining together. And there's also some basting in here, or maybe there's just another, whatever the kind of seam is that you make so that it doesn't stretch around a curve. But you wind up having a fairly narrow or fairly thin seam allowance between this to put the lining together and then to sew the outer side together. And mine wound up, as you can see here, it's really kind of puckered. And I don't like how that looks very much. So, but getting that together, that was one of the most complicated things on this dress for me. Let's see, the next thing is on the skirt. So here's my skirt. I don't know what to do about this, but I feel like this isn't very nice. I have sort of, on my skirt, so this pattern has these two bottoms. This bottom or this bottom. And these two are basically the same, but the material is different. And this one has a third layer. So this has got purple, blue, green. This one's got 2 layers of white and then white, and they don't show up that much, or they don't look that distinct on these two pictures. And then these two dresses have basically the same skirt as well, but this is a longer pattern. This one's a little bit shorter. Otherwise, these costumes are pretty much the same. When I cut out the bottom, it doesn't seem to finish this edge, and there may be something that you can do with this so it doesn't fray quite so much. But I use sort of a silk on top of this, I guess, organza netting. And this netting that I got is glow in the dark. So I hope it's going to look really neat when it's done, and my daughter's got it out in the dark or in her room or whatever. But the edges, they don't finish. They're not finished. This just kind of rough cut, and they wind up looking a little bit frayed. And after a little bit of wearing of this, I think it's going to look. It might not look very good. The second thing is, and this is a thing I'm working on right now, is the casing on this. So the pattern recommends that you do actually a lot of sewing on this. I'm going to pause this for a minute. So here's the pattern for the skirt and the casing. So you basically make the same. The pattern shows the flat skirt, but you put the casing on regardless. The waistband, the casing on both bottom skirts. So these bands get sewn together. They get basted on, stitched on, trimmed, wrapped around. Then it says to edge stitch the upper and lower edges of the casing. This for me turned out to be bad advice. And then lastly, it says you cut out the elastic, thread the elastic through, and then stitch that guy shut. I could not fit my elastic through this casing with any edge stitching. So I did stitch it in place, and I did this stitch, base, stitch, trim, press, basically flip it over, and then slip stitch, get this thing on all put together. And then I did an edge stitch, and that turned out to be a big mistake for me. It was a giant pain. Once this was together, the elastic barely, that they call for in the pattern, barely fits inside the casing. So if you do edge stitch like I did, you won't be able to fit I wasn't able to fit the elastic through. So I had to go through with the seam ripper, and you can imagine seam ripping along this entire thing takes a long time with a 2.5 millimeter stitch. So I guess this is kind of like measure twice, cut once, but look before you stitch that thing in, because I couldn't do that. So I took the stitching out, and now I've got this giant bulky waistband too. And I'm not really sure what to do with this dress at this point, because what I found, rats. What I found was, I pin this together about here. For my daughter, I haven't closed it up yet, but I need to basically cut out about that much more extra length on this waistband for it to fit properly around her waist, for it to be snug. This right now, it's really saggy and really bulky, but it's basically as tight as this elastic can get it with this material in here. So it's really going to be scrunched down, and the elastic is very tightly going to be pulling this waistband together. And I almost think I should have only used one piece of this casing and just, sewn it back on itself and then cinched it down a little bit. But so that's one thing that never didn't feel right to me. Maybe there's going to be a solution to it when I'm actually done with the pattern, but I'm not done with that part yet, and still start figuring out how that's going to work so that it seems to fit properly and looks good. But that's the McCalls 4887. There's only one other thing, that's the wings. I don't really have anything to mention about the wings. I've had trouble getting them to look good. I've got my two sections here. They're kind of done. Getting the wiring through, this 18 gauge wire through and taut, is going to be still a bit of a challenge. I think this will look a little bit better when I'm actually done with it. You can kind of see what that looks like a little bit. I don't know if that's the bottom or the top wing, but I've got the two wings there, but they look kind of frumpy and kind of flat. And I'd like them to look really nice and fluffy. But I think that's mostly it for this costume. The rest of it was fairly straightforward, but this seam on the bodice to get this top of the bodice with the kind of the cape, that was challenging. The dress itself was pretty straightforward. I haven't yet hand sewn these things on. The fringe wound up too short from the pattern, what I thought was the pattern's instructions and what I bought. And then the casing on this and the edging on this skirt are a little bit of question marks for me. But otherwise, this costume is pretty straightforward, pretty good. I think it's going to be nice, and I'm looking forward to this year's Halloween. So hopefully this video is helpful for you with this costume or some other costumes that you might be putting together for your kids.